I want to show you the differences between a scientific interpretation of the Bible and this time from the Book of Ezra and Nehemiah compared to the nonsense of the sages who are like some kind of parliament of Shauli, able to say anything in the name of anything, whatever comes to mind, contradictions, duplications, and they'll justify it with all sorts of nonsense. So let me show you something interesting that's written in the Book of Ezra, chapter 3. In chapter 3, from verse 1 to verse 7, it tells about the building of the altar, because in Ezra's time, they returned from the exile of the first temple, and with the consent of Cyrus, they began to build the temple. So in chapter 3 of the book, it says, "And the seventh month arrived," meaning the month of Tishrei, "and then the Israelites gathered and built the altar of the God of Israel, to offer burnt offerings on it, as written in the Torah of Moses, the man of God. And they set up the altar on its foundations, and they celebrated the festival of Sukkot, as written, and the daily burnt offerings according to the law, each day as required." So here, there are two significant things that actually contradict what is explicitly written in the sacred Torah, specifically within the 5 books of Moses. One crucial point is that they meticulously built the altar even before they had constructed the magnificent temple, and subsequently offered numerous sacrifices upon it. This is in direct contrast to the Book of Exodus, which clearly states that you must first build the Holy Tabernacle and only then proceed to construct the altar. Indeed, in Exodus chapter 40, during the first month, they diligently built the tabernacle, and following that, there was a specific divine instruction to build the altar. But here, suddenly, during the time of the second temple, they build the altar before they have even built the temple itself. The second thing is, it says that they celebrated the festival of Sukkot. What about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What is this silence about? Now, to come and say that he just shortened it and only mentioned one holiday, and that in practice they knew about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that would be very, very unlikely, because just a chapter earlier, already in chapter 1, he describes, and he really details all the vessels that they brought from the captivity to Judah to Jerusalem. And here is their number. Look at the details. 30 gold basins, 1,000 silver basins, 29 knives, almost an entire chapter that lists everything. Afterwards, he details the returnees by name. 2 such important holidays, Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur, you don't mention. Rosh Hashanah, the day of remembrance with the shofar, you don't mention. Only Sukkot, suddenly you mention that they celebrated. So these are the 2 questions that actually arise here from the book of Ezra, chapter 3. First, that they built the altar before the construction of the temple, or not before the temple was built. And the second, that they only mentioned the festival of Sukkot and did not mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So what does the scientific commentary say about these 2 issues? Regarding the first issue, when they built the altar, before the construction of the temple, they note here that it is written, "and they built the altar of the God of Israel." This is interesting. To offer burnt offerings on it, as written in the Torah of Moses, the man of God. Now, the scientific commentary notes that the words "as written in the Torah of Moses, the man of God," in such detail and with such emphasis, appear maybe once or twice in the entire Bible. And from this they infer, why did he suddenly emphasize that these are burnt offerings? They say it is a response to a negative stance. Apparently at that time there was a negative stance. How can you offer burnt offerings on the altar after you have built a house? So he points out, as if to emphasize, no, that's how I interpret it. As written in the Torah of Moses, because someone who doesn't have support wants to strengthen his words against the voices of protest at that time. So he emphasizes it. That's why it says, as written in the Torah of Moses, the man of God, and which is a very, very reasonable interpretation. Regarding the lack of mention of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I'll read you a passage now. and you'll see how the scientific interpretation interprets the scripture from within the scripture itself. After all, there's a contradiction here. You mention Sukkot, but you don't mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But you do mention other things that are marginal, like the numbers of the vases, etc. So they say the following. Another question concerns the other festivals of the seventh month, the month of Tishrei. The Torah mentions in the seventh month, the first of the month, as Rosh Hashanah, a day of remembrance with a blast, and the 10th of the month, which is Yom Kippur, as well as the festival of Sukkot. Of all these, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, which of them is mentioned here in the courtyard? Only Sukkot, and the same goes for Nehemiah, only Sukkot is mentioned. And then they explain it like this. The claim is that the absence of the other two holidays, that is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur from Ezra and Nehemiah, is usually explained by the argument that the priestly instructions, meaning the Book of Leviticus, where Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are actually written, were not known at all to the returnees from exile. They simply did not know about the holiday of Rosh Hashanah or the holiday of Yom Kippur. Because the priestly source that meticulously includes them in the sacred calendar, which prominently contains Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, was carefully composed at a significantly later period in time. And it became known to the people only through Ezra the scribe in the 5th century BCE. That means, according to scientific research and also according to common sense, if you see in the book that those who returned from exile also offered sacrifices and an altar before the temple, as written in the Torah, and they did not mention Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but they did mention Sukkot. And it would be strange that they ignored this and did not mention these holidays when they note every single detail. So the likelihood is that they simply didn't know, and then the priestly source that mentioned Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur was written later, after the returnees from the exile built the second temple. This is very likely. Now look at the nonsense from the sages. Here, the sages didn't address at all why Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur weren't mentioned. They only asked about King Solomon. What about Yom Kippur? Why didn't King Solomon celebrate Yom Kippur? But I won't get into that because it's not part of this video. So here in Tractates Evachim, page 60b, they address the question of how they actually built the altar before the magnificent temple was originally built. Pay very close attention to precisely what they are going to say. At first, they will ask a crucial question. How did they know how to build the altar? Where was the location of the altar? As for the temple itself, they claim you could say they saw the foundations of the first temple. But the altar, how did they know about that? Now look at their nonsense. Rabbi Elazar said they saw a built altar. And Michael, the great angel, was standing and offering sacrifices on it. Understand, the sages lived almost 800 years after the construction of the temple. Look, this is nonsense. It's nonsense. Basically, they're trying to rewrite history backwards. How did they know the location of the altar? They saw it, and they saw Michael, the great angel. That's Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Now you should know, the sages are like a parliament, like Shauli's parliament, just babbling nonsense without any basis, any proof, any findings, nothing at all. They just sit around a table and chatter nonsense, like when people play backgammon and chat idly in the city. So Rabbi Elazar says that they saw Michael, the great angel, standing and offering sacrifices on the altar. That's how they knew the location. Rabbi Yitzhak Nafsha says no, they saw the ashes of Isaac, because the Haggadah says that when Abraham, our father, took Isaac to be bound, he bound him exactly on the spot of the altar that was in the temple. Just more hallucination upon hallucination. And then the ashes of Isaac still remained. So they saw the ashes and said, oh, this is the place of the altar. And then they built it. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that they smelled the scent of the limbs that had been offered. Or apparently, even after 80 years, there was still a scent. And then they come and explain how they actually offered burnt offerings on the altar even before we built the temple. And then Rabbi Yochanan said, pay attention to the detail. Rabbi Yochanan said, 3 prophets, Haggai, Malachi, and Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi went up with them from the exile. And when they came up to the second temple, 3 prophets went up with them, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. And each one of them came and told them a certain law he had heard. One told them about the location of the altar. One of the Levites revealed to them the place of the altar. And this is fascinating, just crazy. The second prophet, though it doesn't specify which prophet said what, testified to them that it is permitted, that the altar can be built not according to the exact measurements of the Torah, because in the second temple, in the courtyard, they built the altar with much larger dimensions. From what is described and specified in the Book of Exodus, which details almost over 10 verses, doubled, in the end they did not build it as it is written in the Torah. So this prophet told them that it is permissible to build it larger than what is written in the Torah. And the third prophet told them that it is permitted to offer sacrifices even though they had not built the house of the ashes. Now they say in the Mishnah of Ta'anit, and then they add Migrar and Kaskeshet. So each one comes and says that there was one prophet among the prophets who added something else besides these 3 things I mentioned. So they say that he testified to them about the Torah being written in Ashurit script, because until they went up in the second temple period, the Torah was not written in our script. Ashurit script is the script we are familiar with in the Torah scroll. The Meruba script is what it's called, because before that they wrote in ancient Hebrew script, whose letter shapes are completely different. So this prophet came and told them, guys, it's permitted to write in Ashurit script during the second temple period, meaning in the time of Ezra, and he was the one who testified to them that the Torah should be written in Ashurit script. So now I say and ask you, especially the believers, come on, snap out of the hypnosis of faith, start thinking critically and ask yourselves, tell me, does this make sense? That in the book of Ezra, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur wouldn't be mentioned, when every single detail is separated out and he already mentions the holiday of Sukkot. It's not reasonable. And remember the rule, if you see a duck, it lives like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, and looks like a duck. It's probably a duck. You see a book, you read the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, which mentions the holiday of Sukkot, but doesn't mention Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. It mentions that he built the altar before the temple, contrary to what is written in the Torah, and that he made measurements larger than what is written in the Torah. It is likely that Ezra and all those who came up from Babylon and built the second temple were not so familiar with the Torah, and that the version of the Torah, mainly the priestly version, was written later. So snap out of this hypnosis and ask yourselves, what would you say if you saw such a question and contradiction in Christianity or Islam or any other sect? What would you compare it to? You'd probably start saying that some prophet revealed to them the location of the kitchen, that the prophet told them it's allowed to offer sacrifices before building the temple, that they're allowed to change the script from ancient Hebrew script to Assyrian script, to the square script, all that nonsense from Chazan. And I'm sure that if you think about it seriously and honestly, you'll eventually come to the conclusion that all the holy scriptures and the halacha are human creations, just like any other human creation, and that the Talmud as a human creation is one of the most shameful works to have arisen in the Jewish religion. And aside from that, I believe that Hamas must be eliminated.